I am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, from slut-shaming to deepfakes, the new sexual violence. If you haven't yet listened to last week's episode 456, Raising Daughters and Sons in a Sexist World, I highly recommend it. Today's conversation builds on that topic. I am joined by Leora Tanenbaum, author of Sexy Selfie Nation, Standing Up for Yourself in Today's Toxic, Sexist Culture. Leora has spent over 30 years researching slut-shaming, long before the term even existed. Her first book, Slut, considered one of the top 20 must-reads for women, is foundational in feminist literature and sparked a cultural conversation that continues today. Leora has written for the New York Times, Teen Vogue, 17, Cosmopolitan, The Nation, and more. She appeared on Oprah, The Today Show, Nighttime, and NPR, and is a regular commentator on gendered double standards. In this episode, Leora and I dive into why today's digital landscape is more dangerous than ever for young women and girls, how self-sexualization can feel empowering but often isn't, the three systemic forces behind non-consensual sexualization, gendered school dress codes, image-based sexual abuse, victim blaming, and how parents can open these conversations with empathy, not shame. This isn't just a conversation about sexuality, it's about consent, autonomy, power, and reclaiming dignity in a culture that so often strips it away. It's an eye-opening, deeply important discussion. But before we get to today's episode, I have a quick announcement. The Authentic Parenting podcast is turning 10 years old this August. I honestly cannot wrap my head around it. Can you believe it? What began as a passion project, a labor of love, without a clear vision for the future, has grown into something magnificent and extraordinary. In fact, the very first episode was recorded without a microphone. I know. 10 years later, we have released nearly 500 episodes, interviewed hundreds of world-class experts, and reached millions of listeners in more than 50 countries. We have also built an incredible global community that I'm proud of. From our free Facebook support group to live podcast events, to a sold-out one-day conference, and the free support calls that we began hosting since March 2020. You, my listener, you have shown up with dedication, courage, loyalty, connection, and compassion. And there is more to come. Community means everything to me. I am incredibly proud of the safe, supportive, and empowering space we have created together, where parents from all over the world come together to grow, learn, reflect, and support one another. And now, to celebrate this incredible milestone, I want to include your voice in a very special anniversary episode. Would you consider sending me a short voice note? Here are a few prompts to guide you. What do you love about the show? What are your favorite topics or episodes? What lessons or insights have stayed with you? What sayings or ideas do you come back to? Why do you keep listening? What makes Authentic Parenting your favorite podcast? Maybe the show has helped you stay grounded through tough times, sparked a shift in your parenting, or simply made you feel less alone. Whatever your story, I want to hear it. Record a voice note on your phone and email it to me at info@authenticparenting.com. There is a free tool on the contact page of my website called SpeakPipe. You can send it directly through there. So go to authenticparenting.com/contact and you can see it. Or simply call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. Whatever method you choose, I want to hear from you. Please submit your voice message by August 21st. Your voice will be featured in our celebratory episode. Don't delay. Do it now. Don't assume others will do it. You do it too. And please don't tell me you don't like your voice. I want to hear your voice. And now, please enjoy this fantastic episode and thank you for listening. Welcome, Leora, to the podcast. I am so delighted to have you on.
Anna, good morning. I'm so happy to be here.
You've written 6 books, and I hate to ask this question. What inspired you to write this latest book? But you've been doing research for 30 plus years on the same topic. I want to know what keeps you going, what inspired you or motivated you to even dig into this topic in the first place.
I'm very happy to answer that question. So yes, I actually started doing research and writing on the topic of slut shaming in the 1990s, if you can believe it. And here's what started the whole thing. There was an article that appeared in the New York Times in 1993 that was a report about the first ever study that had been conducted by the American Association of University Women on sexual harassment in middle schools and high schools in the United States. And at the time, in 1993, I was a few years out of college and I was living in Brooklyn, New York. And I had a job in Manhattan, but that morning I was sitting in my Brooklyn studio eating my breakfast of muffin and coffee and kind of tiredly scanning my print New York Times, because of course back then it was only in print. And this article was buried in the middle of the A section. And so I'm flipping through the pages. I get to the article and it was that proverbial light bulb over the head moment where I saw this article and I realized, wow, there's all this sexual harassment going on in middle schools and high schools. And the reason this really resonated with me is that a number of years prior, when I had been in high school, I had been the victim of slut shaming, although word slut shaming had not yet been coined and nobody thought of it in these terms at all. Even the word bullying wasn't used back then. But in 1984, when I was a first-year student in high school, I had been labeled a slut by one of my classmates and developed what we would call, I guess, a reputation. And there were all these stories about me, and it was a reputation that followed me actually for the rest of my 3.5 years following until graduation from high school. So that's the context of why, when I read this New York Times article nearly a decade later, it really, really resonated with me. And this article reported that the American Association of University Women survey found that 42% of girls nationwide had been victimized by what they called peer-to-peer verbal sexual harassment. Now, Anna, peer-to-peer verbal sexual harassment, it didn't like that, again, this was an era when we were not using language like that. Even the term sexual harassment was still relatively recent from a historical point of view and was still largely used in the legal sphere, was not really used in vernacular conversational, English. But when I saw that, I realized, oh my God, what happened to me was peer-to-peer verbal sexual harassment, but I had never thought of it that way, did not have the language, did not have the tools. And all of a sudden, I had this way to make meaning out of my own lived experience. And reading that article was just transformational for me. I don't know. I know the word transformational is a little bit hackneyed, perhaps. I really don't know what other word to use. It truly, truly changed my life. And all of a sudden, my eyes were opened and I realized, oh my God, I too had been victimized in this way. Oh my God, I'm not the only one. I'm one of at least 42% of girls nationwide. And so what I decided to do, and this was purely like a personal passion project, I decided I wanted to go find some other people who had experienced this also, because I had never known that other people had experienced this also. And so this was in my mid-20s, which occurred in the mid-1990s. Over the next few years, I ended up speaking with over 50 girls and women. It ended up their ages ranged from 14 to 66, all across the United States, different ethnic and racial backgrounds, different geographies, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, all of whom had experienced what later became known as slut shaming. And that ended up becoming my first book, which came out in 1999 called Slut: Growing Up Female with a Bad Reputation. And in that book, I coined the term slut-bashing, which then morphed into slut shaming. So that was the experience, the pivotal experience that got everything going. The research and writing that has continued since then, but really wanted to, to explain what started it all.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sure so many people can resonate. What I want to ask you is, well, I have so many questions, but I think I'll ask this. How has it changed, the slut shaming over the years, right? I think you're the right person. You're the observer and the studier of this. Now with the internet and social media, is it worse? Is it better? Having a teenager, I kind of know one thing, that kids are a lot aware these days of those kinds of terms. They call it out. They are more assertive than when we were, like the way you were describing. You didn't even know that was even a thing, verbal assault and things like that. I think kids these days are more aware. But slut shaming, has it changed, and how has it changed over the years?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Absolutely, you're right. Teenagers, young people of all genders are much more aware because we have this language now, and that helps us create meaning out of these lived experiences, and they are much more likely to call it out. You are correct. And so you might think that as a result, conditions have gotten better because there's education, because there's awareness, because we have the language to talk about it. However, I am, very distressed to report that despite all those very positive developments, the situation is significantly worse than it was when I first started doing this research. The girls and women who shared their stories with me for my first book told me about experiences of excruciating cruelty. Classmates who would call them slut or hoe to their face, would write graffiti, for example, on the back of the school building or in the bathroom. I don't know if anybody in your audience remembers what used to be called slam books. Those were, again, before the rise of digital culture, those were hard copy, actual print notebooks that students a generation ago and even before would pass around among each other with the purpose of spreading gossip and hurtful comments. Slam books were another way to engage in slut shaming. Some of my interviewees told me about classmates throwing bottles and cans at their heads, telling them to drink bleach and die. Teachers, in many cases, saw this behavior and did nothing to intervene. And I do want to pause and say, I don't blame the educators of previous generations. They did not have the experience to deal with this. They didn't even necessarily know how to identify or intervene against bullying. And even the term bullying just wasn't popularized back then. However, on the flip side, many educators should be held accountable because they assumed that the targeted student had done something to deserve her treatment and that therefore this was behavior for which teachers did not need to intervene. So we absolutely should hold those accountable. But I think for a lot of teachers, they just didn't really understand what was happening. A lot of adults really failed the students because they did think that this was something the students deserved. So even if a particular girl in a particular school was being treated in this horrific way, her friends' parents might have known because maybe their child told them what was happening, and they may have concluded, oh, that girl did something to deserve it. So there was a whole layer of parents as well who were complicit. The thing that's really interesting when I compare the way it was versus the way it is now is in the 1990s, schools had at any one time maybe 1, 2, or 3 students who were singled out in this manner. And I want to say, Anna, this is my observation. There is no data. Nobody has actually collected data on this. So I'm going by my observation as somebody who has at this point spoken with thousands of students who have been harassed in this manner. So it was such a lonely experience and such a singular experience back then. And those who were harassed as sluts and hoes truly experienced their harassment alone with no support. But back then, as traumatic as those experiences were, generally the slut shaming did die down after a period of time. Again, this was before the rise of digital culture, before social media, before smartphones. So there was kind of like a built-in expiration date. Like you would graduate, move on, you could start over. In fact, in the 90s and even in the early 2000s, when students or their parents would reach out to me and ask me for advice, the number one thing I used to say back then was, have you considered transferring to a different school? Because back then you could escape. Like escape was actually an option, and many students did take advantage of it. And I'm not saying that escape is always or was always the right thing to do, but it was a possibility. It was something that you could do. You could reinvent yourself back then. But then, of course, the World Wide Web, social media, and smartphones just transformed everything. And 10 years ago, in 2015, I published a follow-up book to the 1999 book. And that book, the one that came out in 2015, is called I Am Not a Slut, Slut-Shaming in the Age of the Internet. For that work, I went back, I did a whole new round of research. I wanted to see what was happening, now that there was sexting and
nudes,
new ways to bully and to slut shame, new platforms, new channels, new ways of doing it. And that's when I discovered, and your audience will not be surprised, that everyday slut shaming had become dramatically, horrifyingly worse. And that as digital culture had blossomed, slut shaming became even more pernicious and inescapable, with name calling traveling. If you remember, MySpace, it would travel from MySpace to Facebook to places like Yik Yak, that anonymous platform. And then with the invention of smartphones, photos and videos obviously always speak louder than words. And a girl now could be transformed into a slut like in the blink of an eye. And that really changed everything. And of course, transferring to a new school made no difference. So in the 90s and early 2000s, when I would speak to groups of young people, in the room, there would only be a handful who had been labeled a slut or a hoe. But then 10 years ago, when I would say, if you feel comfortable doing so, raise your hand if you've ever been called a slut or a hoe. And pretty much if you were under the age of 30, you were raising your hand. So it was just so much remarkably and exponentially worse because of the reach of internet and social media. And then, of course, as we know, your private selfies, you don't even have to share it with somebody. Even your private selfies that you don't share with anybody could be stolen from the cloud or distributed widely without your consent. And we saw a bunch of episodes with celebrities in which that happened. And now in 2025, it's even worse because now with artificial intelligence, these nudify apps, you can have your face attached digitally to graphic sexual content, what's known as deepfake content. It's utterly synthetic, yet it appears authentic, and it has the power to humiliate and traumatize in a whole new way. So, yeah, Sorry to give you the very, very long answer to your question, but so much worse today.
What can you say how young people talk to one another? They use these terms to refer to one another these days. Like, what's behind that?
Yeah, no, that's so true. And that is troubling. But at the same time, I do understand and have empathy for the desire to claim ownership over hurtful words. And there is a history of people from marginalized groups attempting to reclaim the insulting language used against them and to kind of turn it around and use that language as a badge of honor. And with words like slut and hoe, that is no exception. We can look at whether or not those efforts are successful or whether they only reinforce the misogyny and sexism and just make conditions worse for women. And, I've thought about this a lot and I've seen all different arguments on both sides. I'll tell you where I stand on this now, although I reserve the right to change my opinion in the future because I'm constantly thinking about this very deeply. And I have changed my mind many times. Where I am now is that on the individual level, if reclaiming these terms and using these terms like with your girlfriends to describe yourself, within sort of a closed environment among like-minded people, if that makes you feel more in control when you're living in this world where you really have no control over how your image is used and how your reputation can develop, I have so much empathy for that behavior. I truly do. But simultaneously, and I think your question is hinting at this, I have a lot of concern in terms of sort of the mass or, how the holistic way approach, the macro approach, how does attempting to reclaim that language, how does it affect girls and women as a class of people? And is that making things worse for us? And I believe the answer is yes, but I wouldn't want to take away from any individual person her coping mechanisms on dealing with this, frankly, quite traumatic experience that so many young people are living with on a daily basis. So I have a lot of empathy and also have a lot of concerns.
In reading your book, that's what I really liked about your voice is it's not extremist, it's biased. Not biased, it's balanced. You have a very balanced approach to this. So a friend of mine who is in her 30s recently experienced something in a gym where she works out. The coach, the trainer called her, "Hey, doll, can you do this?" And when she told me the story, I said, "Wait, what? He talked to you like that?" I said, "That's so misogynist. That's a sexist remark." I sort of like instigated her. She was not thinking much about it at first. But after reading your book and Joanne's book, I've been thinking about those topics and dealing with my own biases, and my eyes are open. I said, no, you can't let that happen. He's going to talk to this way to other women and all of that. So she went and she complained, and now he's issuing an apology. So that's
why. Yeah, congratulations to her. Wow.
Right?
Because that could have absolutely gone the other way too.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
So one thing there is so many things. It's such a rich topic, The victim blaming is one thing I want to ask you about. But one thing I was trying to talk to you about is this bodily autonomy when women take back and, they feel empowered because they have been traumatized, right? The chapter on OnlyFans where you write about this woman who was, who experienced trauma and now she created her own content. She took back her autonomy and all of that. She was working in this law firm. That story I'm talking about. But my question is this, is this the only way by sexualizing yourself? Is this the only way to cope with this? Aren't you sort of perpetuating the same narrative? I am a little confused and conflicted in that. I feel like, yes, I understand. They feel empowered and they take their power back. They are autonomous. They can do what they want, but they also sort of perpetuate the same narrative. So help me understand that. Am I right? Am I wrong to be confused about this?
So, Anna, you've asked the $1,000,000 question, right? I mean, that is the question you just asked is the central dilemma that we, those of us, you, me, your audience, those of us who care so deeply about improving the lives of girls and women, that we need to figure out the answer to right now in this historical moment. And I'm so glad you asked it. I'm going to answer your question by stepping back a little bit. So I will answer your question, I promise. But before I get to sort of the short, succinct answer, I want to step back and fill in for your listeners the larger context, and then I'll narrow in and get to the answer. So if you and your listeners will bear with me, I do want to address the fact that for young women today, they are experiencing relentless non-consensual sexualization. And in fact, the reason I started this most recent project that led to the book Sexy Selfie Nation is because I was getting so many messages from panicked parents of young women about their daughters, for lack of a better word, self-sexualizing, wearing clothes that, according to the parents, were too provocative, too revealing, posting on their TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat bikini selfies or other types of images that I call sexy selfies. I know that's not a term that young people use, but I think it's a term that resonates with parents. And so many parents were basically deluging me with these requests for guidance. Like, what do I do to help my daughter so that she will stop doing this self-sexualizing behavior? Because I believe it is inappropriate. And a lot of these parents identify as feminist, and I give them so much credit because although they confided in me that they find this behavior of their daughters, quote unquote, inappropriate and troubling, they as parents were very mindful that they did not want to slut shame their daughter. So this was, a generation of parents who know about slut shaming, care about stopping slut shaming, yet simultaneously, want to make sure that their daughters kind of fall in line and wear more, cover up more, wear clothes that in their opinion are more, quote unquote, appropriate. And some of the comments I got from parents are quite revealing. One mom said to me, "You're a feminist. Aren't you horrified that so many young women are objectifying themselves?" Another mom direct messaged me, "I keep telling my daughter to change her outfit and delete her bikini selfies, but she won't listen. What should I do?" And so I realized that the only way that I could be of help to the parents was to speak to the young women directly. And so I ended up spending 6 years talking to them and creating a safe space for them to open up about their decision making so that I could get the answer to your excellent question, which is, why are they doing this? Like, what is behind their decision making? And what they told me again and again and again is that, in fact, they are not trying to be sexual. They are not intentionally trying to present themselves as sexy. And a lot of the time, they don't think of their clothing as having anything to do with sex. I know that may be very perplexing to the members of the generation of the parents, but it's important for the parents and other adults and educators to know that that is the mindset of the young people. They generally don't think of this behavior as sexual. Rather, what they kept telling me is that they are standing up for themselves and taking ownership and autonomy over their bodies. And what they are doing is challenging this relentless, non-consensual sexualization and theft and commodification of their images. And they kept telling me they're just dressing in ways that they find comfortable. And we can talk about what the word comfortable means in a moment. And that they are creating and sharing these sexy selfies as a method to have control over a situation rather than allowing themselves to be passively objectified by others. and that they're essentially taking control over a very brutalizing and demoralizing situation. So it became clear to me that parents who are anxious about their daughters looking inappropriate should redirect their concern, and that the real problem is actually not what young women are wearing, but rather the rampant sexual objectification and violation of bodily autonomy that they face every day. So I would love to dig deep into, what that brutalizing landscape is. I see three different components to it, but I just wanted to say that there are so many different ways that we can look at what's happening. There is the way that you're suggesting, which I know resonates with so many people, and it resonated with me even a few years ago, which is sexualizing yourself really the solution? I don't think that it is. And what I am asking people to do is to pivot. And instead of asking that question, which to my mind is the wrong question, instead, the real question is, what is happening? What are these young people experiencing that leads them to this behavior, as opposed to, well, why are they doing that? That's bad.
Yeah. So what's happening? Can that be changed and challenged in a different way? That's my question. But also when they say, I take back control and all of that, is that real control though? Is it full control? Is it a pseudo control? I feel like, yes, where the culture is still toxic and misogynist, you can feel sort of empowered, but aren't you also vulnerable at the same time?
Yeah.
That's where I'm a little confused. And maybe I'm older and I need to learn more. And even a friend of mine just the other day, kind of unrelated, but not quite, said to me, she's like, you dress younger for your age. I'm like, what? I didn't even know how to answer that question.
Was that a compliment or an insult?
So it was not a compliment. I don't think so. It was like kind of like I took it the way is that's wrong. Like you should dress appropriately for your age. Like, what does that mean? I mean, we do this to each other, right? But so maybe you can write that down and answer it if you want.
Anna, if you'll forgive me, I'm dying to know how you responded.
I didn't know what to say. I was shocked because this is a friend who is open-minded and I was surprised. And I always, I wanted to continue the conversation truthfully and say, what do you mean by young? I don't know. I'm dressing like whatever I think is good for me, whatever I like, whatever suits my body. Like I don't think much about it. But
that's
yeah.
such a revealing exchange. So Anna, imagine how you felt, or remember how
Uh-huh.
you felt when you were asked that question.
Hmm.
And now put yourself in the shoes of a 15-year-old girl. And instead of being asked or being told implicitly what you're wearing is inappropriate for your age and you shouldn't be dressing so young, now put yourself again in the body of a 15-year-old who's being told by her parent or her teacher, you look inappropriate. And so I'm so glad that you raised that exchange with us, because it does open a sort of portal for the generation of the parents to get into the mindset of the daughters. And as upset and perhaps insulted and perplexed as you were, that is how the young people are also reacting. When their parents say you look inappropriate, they don't totally understand what's going on. I would like to break down three pillars of non-consensual sexualization that are shaping the daily lives of girls and young women, and then circle back to your excellent question. Is this real control that they're exercising? Because that is, of course, the most important question that we need to answer. But again, knowing the context is essential. So in the book, I do go through these three pillars of non-consensual sexualization. And the first one is gendered dress codes in schools. Dress codes have become extremely commonplace. In fact, 93% of public schools in the United States have a dress code policy. And the majority of these dress code policies are written and enforced in a way that disproportionately affect girls. It is typical for a school dress code policy to prohibit skirts or shorts that are shorter than where the fingertips fall when you're standing. That's called the fingertip rule.
I'm aware of that, yes.
Right? You have a teenager, so you know.
Yeah.
It is typical for these dress codes to prohibit tops that have spaghetti straps or that are cropped and so on. And
leggings that show the underwear lines. That's another thing.
Yeah, there are a lot of schools that will say if you wear leggings, you have to wear a tunic top that covers your behind. You can't wear, exactly as you say, you can't have, like, for example, a combo of leggings and a crop top. That won't work because then the behind is more revealed. So there are all of these, granular ways of writing these dress code policies. Regardless of the intention of the school administration, which may be a good intention, like a protective gesture, it almost doesn't matter what the intention is, because the consequence is that these dress codes make girls' bodies the center of attention and implicitly or explicitly suggest that girls' bodies are a problem and must be covered up, because you have a situation where you're a girl, you're going into the school building or you're going into your classroom, and teachers and administrators, as part of their job, have to look your body up and down and assess if you are being compliant or not with the dress code, which is like so icky and disgusting. And what this means, again, like regardless of whether the intention is meant from coming from a positive place. Again, I don't actually think that that's relevant. I want to focus on the consequences. And the consequences are that we have a whole generation of girls who are growing up being told by authority figures, their teachers, that their bodies are shameful and distracting, because that is the message that they are absorbing. And I also want to add that trans and non-binary students and students of color are disproportionately disciplined as a result of school dress codes. And we have the data on this from the National Women's Law Center. So this is shaping the way a whole generation of girls experiences their body and their sexuality. And what they are experiencing is other people are looking at me and objectifying me. And they are getting this message at really young ages. There are schools that start doing this in lower school. So you've got girls as young as 7, 8, 9 who have not developed any sense of, thinking about sexuality at all, or thinking about their bodies in this way at all. And even before they're capable growing into that phase of development, they're already internalizing this message. The good news, there is some good news here, I will say. In the book, I actually share a number of really great, inspiring stories of students who have protested their school dress codes. And they're actually a bunch of success stories, because this is such a horrible environment. And there are a number of school administrators who have been persuaded that they need to fix things. And I do want to add parenthetically, I'm not opposed to dress codes. I actually think dress codes can be useful. What I am opposed to is gendered dress codes that cause girls more than people of other genders to be under the microscope.
Can I interject? I mean, what do boys wear? It's not the same as girls. I mean, girls' clothing, whoever creates the girls' clothing, you can't compare the two, right? Even boys or men don't have to take their clothes off to feel empowered. It's kind of not a even playing field in terms of this clothing thing.
I mean, in hot climates, you'll have boys and girls showing up in school wearing athletic shorts and tank tops, where the girls get called out and the boys don't, which makes you realize it's not about the clothes, it's about the bodies. And you'll also have, and again, the National Women's Law Center has data tracking this, and the ACLU as well. You'll have situations where a girl who has a thinner physique and then a girl with a more, curvy physique are wearing the exact same outfit, same athletic shorts, same tank top. And it's only the girl with the, with the curvier physique who gets called out. So again, it's not the clothing it's the body.
Mm.
And is this really the message we want young people to be
Mm.
absorbing, that there's something about your body type that gets you called out?
Mm.
So I am hopeful, fingers crossed, in this area of non-consensual sexualization, because I do see progress with a number of schools
Mm.
waking up and realizing we need to revise the way our dress code policies are written, and we need to rethink how we're enforcing them so that we aren't disproportionately looking at girls or looking at girls with curvier physiques. So
What
yeah.
if they went to uniforms?
Yeah, no, uniforms are interesting. You actually end up with a similar consequence
Really?
where, again, if you have a curvier girl, then she can be told your uniform, skirt, pants, what have you, top isn't fitting you properly. So you still have the scrutiny. I also, I know there are many different opinions on pros and cons of school uniforms. My own opinion is, as a parent and as somebody who's been working with young people for so long, is that having the ability to choose your own clothing and to be creative in that way is just an important part of development and the human experience. And I'm not generally a big fan of uniforms because you're taking away to me, such an important aspect of learning how to grow up and how to develop and how to, be a person in the world. But I do respect people who support uniforms. I would, if it's okay, Anna, I
Hmm.
would like to address a second form of non-consensual
Yes,
sexualization
please.
that young people kept telling me about.
Hmm.
And this was the distribution of intimate images without their consent, which is
Mm.
commonly known as quote unquote revenge porn or deepfakes.
Mm.
Activists call this image-based sexual abuse, or IBSA. 90% of IBSA victims are women. Many others are non-binary. And 40% of students today know of a deepfake image depicting someone at their school. And so that is another area in which young people are experiencing a sense of futility over having control over their image. Going back to your excellent question, what is control? Are there the decisions that young people making about their appearance? You asked, is this real control? Is this fake control? Again, I want to situate their decision making within this environment where you can do everything. I hate to use the word right, but you could like be the most cautious person. You can play it totally safe. You can maybe you've never taken a nude selfie or semi-nude selfie in your life. Maybe you've never taken a selfie of any kind in your life. Even still, you can be victimized in this way because all a bad actor needs is a photo of your face, and they can create sexual image with your face, and they can create images and videos that look so real. And we know, and this is really scary, even when people are told, hey, that image was created by AI, it's not real, that person did not actually engage in that behavior, people still have so much, the people who see the image have so much trouble wrapping their head around that, because once you see an image like that, it is really hard to forget it. It's really hard to unsee it. And it does have an effect on how the victim is treated. And we do not yet have protections that are strong protections against this. Now, in May, in the US, the Take It Down Act was signed into federal law criminalizing so-called revenge porn and deepfakes. This law is important. It actually offers victim survivors a mechanism to force websites to remove the intimate content that is shared without their permission and to hold accountable those who are responsible for distribution. But this is really just a Band-Aid solution. It's not a structural solution. We still do not have any deterrent to discourage this abuse in the first place. And it also places the burden on the victim to take action. And so this is still a really big problem. And that law only is about websites. You could have a student creating through a nudification app an image and sharing it and not posting it online, in which case this legislation wouldn't even apply at all. And so again, like, I want your listeners to understand the mindset of why somebody would choose to behave in ways that might appear to be actively sexualizing themselves because this is the environment they're growing up. And I know we're getting close on time. I really want to add one last pillar of non-consensual sexualization. I'll do this really fast because this is not new. It's just a continuation of what we women have been experiencing for so long, and that young people told me again and again they continue to experience, which is that after being sexually harassed or sexually assaulted, they are blamed for their victimization and are told that they were asking for it, be it because of the way they were dressed, where they happened to be, if they were drinking alcohol, just for existing, because of the way their body looks, that for any reason, they are told that they are asking for it. Even after the Me Too movement, this has not gone away. And look, with the P. Diddy court case, we've also seen again and again how victims are held accountable for their own victimization and are not taken seriously, even when they say no. People say, well, you didn't really say no, or you didn't say it the right way, or you didn't say it loudly enough, or you didn't scream, or what have you. And so this is just another example of how young people today are growing up with this relentless, brutalizing, non-consensual sexualization. So, and I know I've been talking a lot, but I wanted to set the stage so that we could address your really, really important question, which I did not forget, which is if a young person chooses to wear clothes or chooses to post selfies in which she's sexualizing herself, is this real control or not? Okay, so now I will answer you. No, it is not real control. Of course not. However, nobody has real control. Mm-hmm. None of us do. Mm-hmm. So why are we pointing a finger at the girls and saying what you're doing is a bad idea because you don't truly have control, when none of us have control in the first place and there is no actual control? Why blame the victims? That is the framing that I want listeners to think about. None of us have control today. Not you, not me, nobody listening. We don't. That has been taken away from us. In that environment, my opinion is, how can we blame somebody who on an individual level does what she can to bring a little joy to her life?
No, I understand that. I have so many questions. Like I have in my notebook, I've written previously before I was, we jumped on the call. I am writing down new questions as you speak. Oh my gosh, this is such a rich topic. But I think let's end with what parents can do and what young people can do themselves. How can parents talk to their children? Maybe some practical tips.
Yeah, no, and thank you, Anna, again, for indulging me as
no, it's very
as I filled in this
it's
very large, culture-wide phenomenon, because I don't want listeners to lose sight of that. So yes, brass tacks. What can parents do? The number one thing I counsel parents when they come to me and ask for advice is to pause, think, and be strategic in how you talk to your daughter when you believe that she's wearing clothes or posting selfies that you think are too revealing or that are quote unquote inappropriate. So even when it's coming from a good place, I don't recommend telling your daughter things like, you look like a slut, you look like a hoe, you can't go out looking like that, you need to delete that post, you're going to distract the boys, you look like you're asking for it. Honey, that's such a cute outfit, but you're just too busty or too big to wear that. Again, even if it's coming from a place of love and a desire to protect, the way those phrases and those words will land will not help you as a parent. In fact, they will boomerang and will hurt you. And so I ask parents and teachers, by the way, to think about things from the point of view of the young person and why they are making these choices and meet them where they are. And that means using alternate language. Things like, honey, it makes me happy to see that you like your body and that you're proud of it. And you shouldn't feel ashamed of your body. And if anybody makes you feel ashamed, they're behaving badly and you have no reason to feel that way. Things like, you look fantastic, but there is a lot of sexism and racism out there. And even though I think you look fantastic and you objectively do look great, there are a lot of people out there who aren't going to see it the same way that we do. So why don't we figure out a way that you can walk out of our home feeling confident and amazing and empowered, but also in a way that you can feel protected against these bad people who have these sexist and racist beliefs. But let's remember, even if they say bad things to you, you don't deserve that. So it's reorienting parents so that they can be helpful and meet their daughter where their daughter is from a place of empathy.
Mom, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of something. I grew up in Armenia. The culture there is very different. I don't know how it is now, but when I was a young person there, you can walk down the street and men can throw comments at you. Very sexual comments. So a woman from Ukraine who grew up in a similar way, just recently told me this. Oh, that man, he looked at me this way and told me this, some kind of comment like that. And she's like, that made me feel so good. And in my mind, I'm like, ew, that's disgusting. Like, why is she welcoming this? Age plays a role in how we react to these kinds of things. Culture plays a role, right? It's such a complex topic and very rich. What is one message do you have for parents, and maybe perhaps the book is written for young women, right? It's not for the parents particularly.
It's really written for both because I see myself as a kind of cross-generational translator, helping the parents understand the young people and helping the young people understand their parents. The dialogue has to go in both directions.
Yeah. So how can we end this conversation with a message perhaps for us to look at underneath our own fears and biases? Like, how can we examine our beliefs?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing I would like parents and teachers to remember is that sexuality is not the problem. The problem is the violation of consent. And I think as long as we keep that message front and center, we will be able to engage with the young women in our lives with a lot more empathy.
Wow, well said. Thank you so much for your work, for your books, and for this wonderful conversation. I can talk to you and learn from you a lot. I have so many more questions than answers, but it's great.
Thank you, Anna. When you invited me to be on your show, I was so excited because I saw that you have described your work as trying to solve problems through non-punitive discipline, connection, love, respect, and understanding of needs and emotions. And that spoke to me so much because isn't that what this is all about?
Yeah, I know. It's hard to change, though, that non-punitive mentality and that black and white thinking, right and wrong, bad and good, It all stems from that, it seems like. Not to open a whole nother conversation, but it's hard to change people's ideas about that. And then we bring it onto ourselves. We judge ourselves by being good or bad. That, that general cultural, that mentality, we do unto ourselves what was done to us kind of thing. And that has to stop. Enjoy your summer, and thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Anna. This has been great. And truly, I really appreciate how you asked the very, very important questions.
Oh, thank you. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Be sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes, and take a moment to leave a rating and review. It really helps others find the show. I would love to hear your thoughts and takeaways. Join the conversation in the Authentic Parenting Facebook group or visit the contact page at authenticparenting.com/contact to get in touch. Authentic Parenting is an ad-free show, and your donations is what makes this podcast possible. Support the show by visiting authenticparenting.com/support or becoming a patron at patreon.com. Your contributions make it possible for me to continue bringing you weekly episodes. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seawold. Thank you so much for listening.